And we're back. I'm speaking with author Mark Mirabello, author of A Traveler's Guide to the Afterlife, Traditions and Beliefs on Death, Dying, and What Lies Beyond, a new release with Inner Traditions. Dr. Mirabello is professor at Shawnee State University. His expertise is on outlaw history on the frontiers and margins of human civilization. I love that. Dr. Mirabello, you lecture on alternative religions and cults, secret societies, terrorism and crime, banned books, and so much more. So welcome to Mystic Fix.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. And ironically, I mean, by coincidence, it was 41 days to today that my mother passed away.
Oh,
And we were talking about afterlife concepts. And for the record, since I have a book on the subject, I firmly believe there's another side. And we should spend a good part of our life now preparing how to properly navigate the distance between the two worlds, so to speak.
I love that. I love that. So I have just been kind of combing over your book. I haven't given it a proper thorough read yet. I was really impressed. You've got 965 sources. This book is well researched,
Thank you.
and yeah, and you get into all sorts of traditions and history, which of course is your background. Your book states that an afterlife is possible without a god or a soul. Can you explain?
Yes, the trouble is in the Western world, we are scientifically and technologically advanced, but by and large, the population is very primitive when it comes to metaphysics. Professor Zimmer, the late Professor Zimmer at Columbia, noted that our metaphysics has not changed since the 18th century. No
Mm.
new ideas. He's absolutely right. And there's just money passed. Now, I should mention quickly that there are many cultures that have no God. Again, in the book I mentioned, there's 35 different cultures. The people of Central Australia, the Aboriginal people of Central Australia, did not have the concept of a God. That used to really alarm people in the 19th century. But every culture on Earth has the concept of an afterlife or another existence beyond death. So we don't really even, now I'm not trying to denigrate the notion of God. If your audience is are believers, that's fine.
They're all
But
different.
yes, there's a wide variety of beliefs. In fact, in Buddhism, they say there's 88,000 paths to the other side. And one of the purposes of my book was to identify some of the paths. Now, for example, in Buddhism, there's no soul at all, but there is an infinite number, almost infinite number of future, the transmigration of souls until you can achieve nirvana and release. And what actually survives is essentially your desire for life, keeps us in this endless cycle of rebirth. Also, you have the concept of block time. Professor McTaggart at Cambridge University wrote a really interesting article around 1900 regarding block time. And Kurt Vonnegut wrote a novel which involves block time. And that means that all time exists all the time. Right now, any listener in your audience, their great great grandmother is a 2-year-old playing on the floor. Right now, somewhere, I am a 7-year-old. And block time means all time exists simultaneously. And essentially, when you die here, you just start over. Your life begins anew. Now, that's a strange kind of eternal life because you're living the same life over and over again, but it's forever.
Yeah.
So you have that concept.
Hard to
Also, you
wrap your
have
mind around.
yes, yes. And there are some other concepts as well, but a soul is actually unnecessary. A God is unnecessary. We tend to think now, by the way, the notion that a God is necessary in Hinduism is called bhakti yoga, where you're saved through a savior God, if you will. Evangelical Christians talk about being saved by their believing in Jesus. Even if they're sinners, Jesus will save them. And again, the Hindus would call that bhakti yoga. They have a similar concept. If you love Vishnu or Shiva, you go to a paradise. And I should let your audience know the phrase Namu Amida Butsu. That's from Pure Land Buddhism. And if you say that once in your life, according to Pure Land Buddhism, you go to a paradise after death.
Hmm.
And again, by the way, there's many, many ways, many notions.
And so please say it again. Nama Amida
Namu,
Namu
Namu Amida
Amida
Butsu. That's the
Boots.
Japanese form. The Chinese is kind of more difficult to pronounce, but
Okay.
Namu Amida Butsu.
Namu Amida
And in
Boots.
English, yes, sorry,
So I've just said it, so I'm safe now,
you're
right?
safe. And by the way, in English, I take refuge in the Buddha and infinite light, which reminds me while we're talking about this, and I hope I'm not rushing, but when you told me we're
No.
15 minutes, I'm trying
Yeah.
to pack all the information in. In Buddhism, now everything is thought. This is called non-dualist thought. They think the entire everything, the universe and so forth, is basically thought. And when a Buddha achieves, there are many Buddhas in Pure Land Buddhism, not just one. There are infinite number of universes, infinite number of Buddhas. You remember the opening statement in Star Wars, perhaps, in another galaxy long ago, far away. That's an idea from Buddhism, if nothing else. And if a person achieves nirvana, release, but does not feel comfortable unless all sentient beings are also released, that creates a pure land, which is a kind of paradise. And the purpose of that is you go there to achieve nirvana. Now, most Easterners view it as basically the end zone, if you will, the final destination. Technically, it's not, but it's this idea that his thoughts have created this wonderful place. Now, I should mention the skeptics in your audience, the scientists. We'll talk about matter and energy only are important. But Professor Krippal from University of Chicago kind of famously said, based on the writings of Charles Fort, that's a half-truth masquerading as the whole truth. We have the smallest universe of almost any civilization because we completely exclude other levels of reality and existence. In Jainism, which is an Indian religion, there are more gods in the universe than there are humans. They outnumber us. And again, we completely ignore this. And what I tried to mention in the book are all these complex notions and so forth, different paths, different ways.
Okay. Wow. So you're sounding like with that Pure Land Buddhism that really it's a oneness thing, really, right? Because we would want everybody to be there so we can all be there, correct?
Yes, although there are many pure lands, I should mention, not
Oh,
just one. In fact, there's virtually an infinite number.
uh-huh.
Well, another point I should mention, this is from the Yoga Vasistha. Sorry to be doing so much Eastern notions
This
because
is
I do
no
other
problem.
concepts as well. This is a concept I personally love, and it's my hope that's the way. We encounter after death what we expect and desire. So, in other words, very literally, the Christian will encounter Jesus. The Muslim will actually encounter this famous 72 virgins. The Comanche on the plains will encounter the happy hunting ground with the bison and the wild cherry juice. The Odinist will encounter his Valhalla. We all receive what we encounter. That's why it's really important not to be a materialist, atheist, skeptic, because according to the Yoga Vasitha, what you will encounter is darkness and emptiness, because that's what you expect. So a person who dies in that fashion will think he's in a coma. That's my clock, sorry. He'll think he's in a coma or some kind of horrible nightmare. So it's important to direct your thoughts in a positive way.
Right.
And incidentally, I actually end the book with a quotation from Blaise Pascal, not only a philosopher, but one of the fathers of modern probability theory and mathematics. And he has the famous Pascal's wager. He's talking about faith in the Christian God, but I alter it at the final book about ideas about the afterlife. And let's say you're a skeptic and you think there's no afterlife that you're going to turn into ozone and fertilizer when you die, and that's it. Well, a gambler, everyone will end up the same place. So you gain no advantage believing in that because everyone will end up in the same place. But if there is an afterlife, especially if it's a paradise, you become the big loser at the gambling table.
Yeah.
You've chosen to believe in nothingness when there is something.
I mean, don't you think they're losing in this life too? Because it's a pretty miserable, nihilistic existence. You know, if there's no meaning, if there's no depth, if this is it, that can be very depressing.
Exactly. Well, by the way, I should mention there's a tendency in the West. I mentioned earlier these. If people do believe in afterlives, it's really simplistic. For example, they think there must be a God involved. There must be an immortal soul involved. There must be an ethical dimension. Now, in the ethical dimension, oddly enough, that is completely unknown to the human race until the emergence of the farmer and civilizations. Hunters and gatherers who believe in afterlives, they think they all go to the same place. It's normally to the west, a wonderful world to the west, but they all go the same place. Evil, good, everyone go to the same place. And it's curious, we don't get the afterlife ethical dimension until the emergence of civilizations. And it seems to be for social control reasons. It keeps the people alive. The poor man who is starving, he looks up and sees the rich man on the hill in the big house, and he's told, keep quiet, don't break the law, because that man on the hill will be punished in the next world and you will be rewarded. So I think probably ethics has very little to do with it, especially since ethical systems vary so much.
Sure.
The Dayaks of Borneo, if you have taken a lot of human heads, you have them, even though everybody goes to the same location, you have greater stature in the other world. In fact, we forget, and this is one of the most fundamental misunderstandings of world religions and traditional religions. In some religions, violence is a religious act. Among the Plains Indians, the Comanche, I mentioned them once before, a brave warrior who perhaps dies bravely under torture, that's an honorable, ethical behavior system. He's killed a lot of people, and he died bravely. And this notion that everything is just love and peace and tolerance, that's a decent position, but it's not a universal ethic, if you will.
Right. Oh, wow. Emanuel Swedenborg, the Christian mystic, believed that the other side was so similar to this world that we're in today that many people don't realize they're dead. Can you explain that?
Yes, I love that. In fact, if you're any Christians in your audience, probably the most interesting descriptions of the other side are from the Church of the New Jerusalem, which is from Emanuel Swedenborg, and ironically, the Mormons. They have a really interesting other world concept of the other world. But back to Swedenborg, he said that literally, I can't really explain it more, that it's an exact replica, and in fact, people don't even realize they're dead because they're expecting something different when it's not. And in fact, he claimed he was a scientist and an aristocrat in Sweden. He claimed over years he was having these visions of God and the other side and the dead, heaven and hell, and so forth. And his complete works are about this thick. And he describes with great detail and frankly has a really interesting depiction of heaven and hell. And essentially, again, to simplify, he says we spend 30 years in the land of spirits. And that's where you'll see your relatives and friends and so forth. And again, it looks exactly like this world. But then you start to gravitate to a final destination, heaven or hell. Now, you're not damned to hell. According to Swedenborg, just as a frog is unhappy in a beautiful pasture with flowers, he likes a swamp. Evil people are drawn towards wickedness and violence and rape. And they gravitate. God doesn't send them to hell. They gravitate there. And he describes it as a kind of a slum. And they prey upon one another. And he says in the next world, here we have our face from our parents. But in the next world, our face illustrates our moral, our loving, our ruling love, he calls it. So an evil person will have a really repulsive appearance. He'll be living in a kind of slum-like, horrible place, but he's happy there. Aleister Crowley said he'd be bored in a heaven. And David
Yeah.
Lloyd George said that. So Aleister Crowley is now, who died in 1947, is partying in some backstreet alley in this place. Now, meanwhile, these Swedenborg said the good people, let's say, imagine the church ladies, an 85-year-old, 90-year-old church lady who bakes apple pies and is always sweet and nice to everybody. She gravitates towards this beautiful place with good people. They're loving, they help each other, they're nice. She's not given heaven, she gravitates there. And because she's a good person, even though she died, let's say at 92, she'll have the face of a beautiful young woman. And old men who die will have handsome young faces. In other words, he doesn't make God responsible for these locations. He essentially says that we choose them because we're happy there. A church lady is happy singing hymns and baking apple pies, and
It
she would be
feels to
unhappy in hell.
me feels to me to be a kind of a metaphor, though, and
Oh, he
just
means it literally.
oh yeah, okay, very interesting. Because I think plenty of us create our own heavens and hells right here,
Yes.
regardless of what is going on and just how we want to interpret it and what we want our attitude to be. But interesting.
By the way,
Um,
the cat. I'm sorry.
yeah. No, go
The
ahead.
Cathars, the Middle Ages, actually thought this was hell, and we are. If we don't understand, they achieved salvation through knowledge. And once you achieve knowledge, you stop being reborn here, and you go to a God of light. And they said that as long as you lack the knowledge, you're trapped here in flesh. You're reborn
Mm,
over and over and over again. But literally, this is hell. I should also mention this is kind of surprising, probably to most of your audience. The first religion or culture to develop the concept of eternal damnation is actually Christianity. It doesn't exist. The Buddhist hell, if you're really, really, really wicked, it's 200 million years, and then you're out. You've exhausted your karma. In Jainism, they have the concept of these pathfinders. That's an Indian religion that lead us and teach us. And in the next cycle of the universe, there'll be a new pathfinder. We just had the 24th one around 500 BC, and that was the last one of this universe. The next pathfinder is presently burning in a hell for a crime, but he will be the next teacher. In the East, we're never beyond redemption. And you can also, in the East, your next life you can become a god. If you become a god, you'll be a god for 3.5 million years. And then you've exhausted your karma and you're reborn, typically
and
lower as a human.
and the Mormons believe that too, right? That you can become a
Yes,
god.
yes.
Yeah,
In fact, oddly enough, it's interesting. The Mormons have received all, and by the way, I'm not endorsing any of these groups. I'm just describing them because I get all kinds
sure.
of hate mail when I say things. And the Mormons have been attacked endlessly. And their idea, it's in fact the notion that Joseph Smith Jr. from upstate New York was able to develop this really elaborate theology, frankly, that's beyond belief. So it does seem to have some element of reality to it. And they have three heavens. And in the top heaven, and by the way, ordinary people just go to the lowest heaven. So there's really not a hell in Mormonism. There's a
Uh-huh.
place called the outer darkness. That's mainly for apostate Mormons, but you can get out. All you have to do
Yeah.
is accept the true faith, and there's salvation even after death. And then the very top heaven has three levels. And at the very top level of the three, you literally become a god or a goddess.
Hmm.
And they teach that they only worship one God. That's called henotheism. There are other gods exist. They worship one God, and he was once a man. And just as they say, just as God once was, we can be, we can
Interesting.
become. God was a man who became a God. He was a man who
Right.
became a God, and we can do the same.
Right.
So
Some people
it's
look at Jesus Christ in that way too. Yeah.
yes,
Um,
yes.
oh gosh, I wish we could talk about everything. I just want to say, with your book, A Traveler's Guide to the Afterlife, you have not only all this information on history and traditions and all these different philosophies, But you've got information on how to enter other worlds, like actual instructions and how to techniques to communicate with the dead. So it's some fascinating stuff from a scholarly angle. So are you advocating for these practices? Do you use these practices yourself, or are you just reporting?
Well, I'm mainly just reporting, although oddly enough, when we do have what at SSU, the so-called Other World Society, and I teach the students how to communicate with the dead. I tell them this may not be true. I'm just teaching you how to do it the proper way. Because once again, Americans have very little knowledge of these things. Probably the most effective method for Westerners, so-called trans-instrumental communication, and where you use a radio turned to white noise and a recording device. And with practice, a woman, a really highly educated woman from Portugal, former ambassador named Dr. Cardoso, she wrote a book on this. In fact, I communicated with her through email. And she was not only able, allegedly, to communicate with the dead, but carry on conversations where they would answer questions.
Is this kind of like the EVPs you see on the Travel Channel with their ghost adventures and
well, again, I never actually have seen some of those, but I should mention to your audience, a lot of these shows distort what goes on. If you, in fact, encounter, for example, a ghost, in most traditions, he will appear three-dimensional and solid. This idea you can see through them is more or less a Hollywood myth. They're translucent. And in fact, if you do see a ghost that you can see through partially, that's a ghost that's fading away. In many traditions, the dead person or the ghost is someone who was prematurely killed, either through suicide, accident, or murder, and will continue as a ghost until he leads out his natural life. So he was supposed to live to 92 or 102, and he's murdered at 19. He'll walk as a ghost for a certain number of years.
Okay.
But they would
not
appear.
Not knowing he's dead. Is that how
exactly?
You're thinking? Mm-hmm.
And by the way, one of the best, I don't know if this is true or not, but years ago, a young lady in one of my classes, I'll try to condense the story, but she had a close friend that was killed in a car accident at age 16, horrible accident. And then this young girl got married at a young age, 19. And after her wedding was over, there was a reception with guests and they got married in a church. She's looking at the wedding pictures and her friend is in the pictures, innumerable pictures. And she showed them to me. She showed me the high school picture of the girl and then showed me the pictures. No one could recall the girl at the reception. And she's never talking to anyone, but she's in these pictures. Now, this could be a stranger, wedding crasher, I don't know, but it's a young 16-year-old girl, and she's not, you don't see through her. You don't see a ball of light. She looks like a totally solid person standing among the guests. It was quite striking.
I think that's kind of beautiful, really.
Yes.
Well, gosh, I wish I could talk to you all day. It has been an absolute pleasure, Dr. Mirabello. And maybe we'll have you on again for one of our Spectre episodes, because we have some planned with ghosts and and otherworldly beings. It seems like you're an expert in all of this. So I do appreciate your time, and
And by the way, if anyone has a malicious ghost, throw a handful of grave earth at the face of the ghost, and he will obey you.
Oh, really?
We'll close
grave
with that. That's
earth.
the old tradition. Yes.
So we should all dig up a little bit of grave earth just to have it on hand, then, right?
I got some in my office.
Why does that not surprise me?
Well, thank you for the invitation.
Oh, you bet. And I'm excited to say that Inner Traditions will be giving one of our listeners a free copy of your book. So go to mysticfix.com for that. Thanks again. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.